Did you know that in some countries, the cost of everyday items like food and necessities skyrocketed unimaginably? In Hungary, prices doubled every 15 hours. In Zimbabwe, they doubled every single day. Moreover, in Yugoslavia, prices jumped by 50% every year. This phenomenon is known as hyperinflation, and it is a threatening crisis that could affect many countries worldwide, even the United States. Hyperinflation means that the prices of goods and services in an economy spiral out of control, making it nearly impossible for people to afford what they need. So, what causes this scenario? And how did these countries, Hungary, Zimbabwe, and Yugoslavia, deal with this economic nightmare? Let's take a closer look at it. When the people of countries like Hungary, Zimbabwe, and Yugoslavia woke up, they realized that the money they had is now worthless. The prices of everyday items like food, clothes, and housing had increased overnight, and these prices grow to such an extreme point that the money becomes useless. But you should know that hyperinflation is not a sudden happening. If the government takes the right measures, it can be avoided. One of the most striking examples is Venezuela. Between 1980 and 2020, the country's consumer prices grew at an astonishing average rate of 3,608.8% per year. That means the product, which was only 100 Venezuelan bolivars in 1980, is now 104,800 trillion Venezuelan bolivars. And the prices are still increasing every day. Within just 41 years, the country faced an inflation of 104,800,000,000% increase. And as you can imagine, the people in Venezuela are facing the devastating effects due to this. Even simple products like soap and toothpaste are now luxury items that only the most elite can afford. Another country that suffered from this disaster is Zimbabwe. In 2007, the country's annual price increase rate reached a staggering 47%. You should know that the rapid currency devaluation in Zimbabwe was so rapid that the prices of products were doubling every 24.7 hours. If something was sold for $2, in the next 24 hours, its price would be $4, and in the next 24 hours, the price would be $8, $16 in the next 24 hours. And this would go on and on. People of Zimbabwe could not buy things in bulk because they would rot or expire with time, and they could not even wait for the next day because the prices would double. As frustrating as this situation sounds, you have no idea how stressful it was for the people of Zimbabwe to face. Besides, the crisis hit them so hard that their own local money lost all its authority. Now, their money is replaced with foreign currencies like the US dollar and the South African rand. But the worst case is undoubtedly Hungary's. In this country, extreme cost increases started after World War II in 1945. Over half of the country's factories and businesses were destroyed, making it much harder for them to provide a stable standard of living for their people. The government was forced to channel increasing amounts of money through private banks to issue loans to businesses, helping them rebuild from scratch. However, this reckless creation of money, coupled with equally reckless borrowing and a decline in the nation's ability to produce goods, led to serious economic problems. The country's prices were doubling every 15 hours, with the highest monthly inflation rate ever recorded in world history. The government forced the citizens to pay for the country's post-war reparations and occupation costs with the tax money of the people. This means that the Hungarians had to recover from the damage of war by sacrificing their economy. There's also the case of Yugoslavia, now known as Serbia and Montenegro. This country suffered high prices in the 1990s. And the highest monthly price rate was a staggering 313 million%. Because the prices were doubling every day, the Yugoslavians had to constantly adjust their budgets. Undoubtedly, the poor were thrown to the streets and the rich became poor within a matter of weeks, because no one could keep up with the rapidly changing prices. In all these cases, the government could not maintain a stable economy. If the government had controlled increasing rates, there would be no catastrophic consequences. But the main root cause of this situation goes so much deeper than you can think. In most cases, even the government has no authority to stop this crisis from happening. So, what was the root cause of out-of-control inflation in all these countries? Now that you know hyperinflation is a phenomenon where the prices increase at an extremely high rate and that it renders the local currency almost useless, can you think how it happens? Well, the answer is that it happens because of government mistakes and financial irresponsibility. The governments of Hungary, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, and Yugoslavia made poor decisions and failed to manage their economies effectively. Ultimately, the price they had to pay for this failure was high prices, and they paid it for double every next day. However, what exactly were the mistakes that the governments of these countries made? How irresponsibly did they manage the economics? In Venezuela, the government decided to print more money to fund social programs and subsidies. It had seemed like a good idea in the start, but things got way out of hand. As a result, this move had disastrous consequences. With more money in the markets, there were more buyers for a single, limited number of products. Thus, the sellers had to increase the price of their products. The more money their government printed, the more increase in the prices happened. All in all, the money lost its value because the prices were right in the sky. In Zimbabwe, the case was a bit different. Here, the government introduced land reform initiatives. And although these were well-intentioned, these initiatives were the base of destruction in the country. It led to food shortages and price increases. The country's poor agricultural production and distribution systems were unable to keep up with demand. Thus, it led to a shortage of essential goods. As a result, prices rose rapidly, and the value of the Zimbabwean dollar lost its value. In Hungary, this situation came as a byproduct of World War II. The government was recovering from the damage of World War II. In fact, the whole of Hungary was recovering from this, but the citizens faced the worst because for them it was like the war had never ended. They still faced a shortage of food and resources and had to pay insane amounts of money for this stuff. On top of it, they had to pay the government to restore the country from the damages of the war. As a result, prices rose rapidly. To avoid this, the printing of excess money, poor economic planning, and inadequate management of resources must be avoided as well. Otherwise, the country and its people will have to face the devastating consequences. Sure, now the governments of these countries know the value of economic growth and inflation, but it is too late for them. It will take decades and decades before these countries have a chance to control inflation and provide their people with a good quality of life. So, how are the people of these countries living right now? What are the devastating consequences other than increased prices and money's uselessness? In all the countries, Venezuela, Hungary, and Zimbabwe, the standard of living was greatly impacted. The rich instantly became poor, and the poor became homeless beggars. Moreover, when the prices rose rapidly and uncontrollably, it led to food shortages and hunger. People who were millionaires in these countries are barely fitting in the middle class now. Whether individual level or national level, the results are devastating. One of the most immediate effects of this is the destruction of personal savings. Because the money becomes useless, your personal savings become useless as well. This means that important purchases, such as housing, education, and healthcare, are completely abandoned. What's worse is that the people have no way of knowing what will happen in the future. Will the prices increase by double tomorrow, or will they be back to normal at last? Therefore, hyperinflation also causes a sense of hopelessness and despair. In Venezuela, Hungary, and Zimbabwe, businesses struggled to keep operating at first, but with the failing economy, they started failing as well. Ultimately, this led to widespread unemployment, business closures, and more decline in economic activity. People cannot even afford healthcare or send their children to schools. And the government cannot help them because the economy is failing. This is why healthcare and education are most severely affected. And do you know that the United States can be the next to join names in the hyperinflation list? How? In 2020, the United States faced a significant crisis as the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic hit the nation hard. Over 30 million people were infected, and tragically, 500,000 lost their lives. While the human toll was undeniably the most devastating aspect, the pandemic also took a heavy toll on the economy. Millions of people found themselves out of work, with many small, medium, and even large businesses forced to close their doors permanently. Industries like tourism, hospitality, in-person retail, and entertainment, once stable, were nearly wiped out. Even though there's hope for a return to normalcy, these industries are unlikely to fully recover for a long time. To counteract the massive economic downturn, the US printed more than a third of the active money supply in just 12 months. This surge in money printing, combined with increased borrowing in the private sector and a drop in the nation's productive capacity due to the pandemic, has raised concerns. If this situation sounds familiar, it might be because similar circumstances have led to severe economic issues in other countries. But some believe that the US is different. Its economy is so large and influential that it may not follow the same rules as these historic cautionary tales. Or maybe it will. To find out, we need to explore some key questions. When does inflation become an unsolvable problem? Why do some think the US is immune from the same consequences? And how can people protect themselves from a worst-case scenario? Many people are already aware that the prices are going up in the United States every month, if not week. But will this inflation increase to a point where it will become hyperinflation? Today, the going concern of US economists is the growing national debt and monetary policy decisions. Because the US Federal Reserve has kept interest rates low for an extended period, there's been a surge in asset prices and a growing wealth gap. As a result, the economy in the United States is overheating. Many banks in the United States are also going to fail by 2025. This is because they owe investors high interest rates over their debt, and the profit margin is not as they expected these recent years. Therefore, it is quite terrifying that the US can easily join ranks with Venezuela, Hungary, and Zimbabwe in the hyperinflation records. Sure, the United States has a strong and stable political system in place right now, but all these countries also had a strong and stable political system in place back then. One mistake from the US government can devastate the lives of millions of Americans for years to come. There needs to be a solid foundation for the economy to reduce the risk. Because the US is already facing economic shocks, even a low risk of inflationary pressure can destroy the value of US dollars. For example, a sudden increase in oil prices or a trade war could lead to higher prices. To prevent this from happening, US policymakers are vigilant. They are taking proactive steps to end these risks and keep the economy stable and prosperous for generations to come. But do you think this hyperinflation can be avoided, especially with the banks set to fail in the coming years? Write in the comments section and give us your valuable opinion.